Jim, thanks for the introduction, and thanks all of you for taking time to learn a little bit more about, Livonia's got a lot of interesting history and stories, and I've been asked to dig into the history of businesses. And our presentation today will send us on a 2-century journey of the people, places, and stories behind the enterprises that shaped Livonia. We will see the transformation of businesses that supported mills, rails, the Detroit race course, auto manufacturing, industrial operations, shopping malls, office hubs, and recent redevelopments. Let me start off by acknowledging Mr. McConnell here. Jim, you literally live history as a teacher, explaining, through when you were done teaching about the churches and Detroit history, and now you've come back and are trying to treasure the history here in Livonia with your work, what you and Annette do. So I do praise you and the board and what you've done to put these programs on, because we do have an amazing history in Livonia, and I appreciate all the work you and Annette have done with this. So. Let me start with a little bit about myself. As Jim mentioned, I'm a Franklin High School graduate. Go Patriots. Even though my children have both gone to Stevenson. I'm a former Livonia Observer newspaper reporter. I worked for the newspaper chain for about 7 years, the last 3 with Livonia. Dave Varga, who's the chief of staff for the mayor, was my editor when I was at the Livonia Observer newspaper. So I have 2 daughters. Janie is a student at Schoolcraft and about to go to Wayne State to pursue a degree in accounting. She just celebrated her 21st birthday last week, and nobody died, so that's good. And then my 17-year-old daughter, Natalie, is a senior at Stevenson High School, where she hopes to, or where she aspires to go to Aquinas College next year to study and to play volleyball. Also, I am a scout leader through Troop 271 at St. Mike's Church. I lead myself and 7 other adults, lead a group of scouts that go to Mackinac Island. This is something I did when I was 11 years old, and I've stayed involved as an adult leader. We spend a week, actually, speaking of historic interpretation, we serve as tour guides at Fort Mackinac. We train the boys throughout the week, and I'm one of the adult leaders for that. So that's something I've been involved with for 40 years now, first as a kid and then as an adult leader. Also, I'm a softball coach at Stevenson High School, and the one thing you see down here is I'm the PA announcer at Stevenson sporting events now for about 18 years now. And I grew up wanting to be Mitch Albom. I'm a sports reporter at heart, and so, doesn't make much of a living these days. That's why I had to get out of journalism. But I live my sports passion through being a coach and a PA announcer. Girls basketball, girls softball, volleyball. I've done Stevenson football for the most of the time. I've done basketball as well. So that's what I've done with that. And then as far as the Livonia Westland Chamber of Commerce, here's the team from us right here. 2 of my colleagues, Dawn and Sherry, are here. Laura and Noah are around me. Our job, we represent, now that we're Livonia and Westland together, 1,200 members. We're the 6th largest chamber in Michigan. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit trade organization that promotes the business community in Livonia and Westland. And our big objectives are promoting the workforce, regional collaboration, and growing a culture of inclusion. These are things that we work on through the chamber, and it's a very, very gratifying work, because basically in our job we're cheerleaders for Livonia and Westland, our hometown. So that's what's kind of fun about the job. All right, I divvied this up into various eras, so we're going to start with pre-1900. By the time Livonia Township formed with the state of Michigan in 1837, as many of you know, we started to see the formation of a bunch of little villages in our area. General Johnny Schwartz developed Livonia's first major settlement in the 1820s. He built a sawmill on the Rouge River in 1826 that led to a distillery, an ashery, brickyards, a hotel, and the town's first church. Other businesses around the river and trails known today as Ann Arbor Trail, Stark, and Wayne Roads. By the 1830s, some 50 buildings were standing up in Schwartzburg. But this did not last long. The growth of nearby Perrinsville, a hotel fire, and prohibition laws and other factors led to Schwartzburg's demise by the time of the Civil War. Now we're standing in a hallowed building and on hallowed ground as far as Livonia history goes. With federal grant money, Joshua Simmons traveled from New York to Livonia in the 1820s to buy 160 acres on this parcel, which is now known as Greenmead, located at the Newburgh Baseline Road area. He built farms and he grew wheat and oats, which was regarded as the area's wealthiest farmer by 1850. His sawmill prepared lumber for homes built in Livonia, Plymouth, and Farmington. The Hill family, who later acquired this property, acquired the Simmons farm and renamed it Greenmead in 1920. And then Alexander Blue, who this house is named for, came here from New York as well and bought 80 acres in the 1830s to farm in the Middle Belt Schoolcraft area. He built this famous house in the 1850s, and it was moved from Greenmead from that location to Greenmead in 1987. I was a middle school student at the time, and I remember that story in the Livonia Observer, the Alexander Blue House moving down the road. I'm sure many of you also remember that at the time. So this building, the Alexander Blue House, is a wonderful community resource, which is a museum and serves as meeting rooms, which came online in 2003. Also, Alexander Blue was a prominent political figure who served as Justice of the Peace for 28 years, Township Supervisor for 3, and later as Postmaster. But other businesses in the area, sawmills, grist mills, cider mills, stores, farms, and hotels emerged in Livonia's villages: Stark, Newburgh, Parentsville, Livonia Center, and Clarenceville. Notably, quite a bit of activity in the mid-1800s occurred along Ann Arbor Trail in Newburgh, centered around a stagecoach stop in between Detroit and Ann Arbor. Lodging and stores were available for guests who stopped there. This stagecoach and nearby businesses lost prominence in the 1870s when the Detroit-Lansing Northern Railway built rail tracks in the township in 1870 and 1871. And a rail stop was built at Livonia Station that opened in the village of Stark. The rail not only transported people across the state, but it also facilitated the shipping of apple cider, cheese, and potatoes that were produced in this area. And last but not least, Wilson Barn was initially built in 1888. It would be a foundation of a significant local dairy business that took root across southeast Michigan in the 20th century, and I'll mention that a little bit later. Next, we'll move into basically the first half of the 20th century, and in that era, we start to see some development of farmland in Livonia. Farmland was created to make way for the town's first airport that was built in 1916 on the site that is currently today's Wonderland Mall or Wonderland Village. I have for you the map right there where the airport was. It was also known as Plymouth Airport because it was on Plymouth Road. Also, Livonia had a second airport during the first half of the 1900s called Triangle Field on the corner of Ann Arbor Road and Ann Arbor Trail. Farmland was also cleared for the construction of the Northville Golf Club, and that's the building right here at the corner of 7 Mile and Newburgh. It was completed in 1923. The banquet room for the club was a notable social attraction as it brought live entertainment in. Also, legend has it that it was a common hangout for members of the notorious Detroit Purple Gang, who was known to be the area's most powerful organized crime organization in the 1920s and 30s, involving primarily Jewish gangsters and other immigrants. The leader of the groups was 4 brothers by the name of Bernstein, which goes to show a century ago the Bernstein advantage was a thing. It's believed that the gang took advantage of the Prohibition era to bootleg and hijacking activities for underworld sales of activities and drugs and running gambling rings. It's believed that the gang also owned a home nearby the club at 7 Mile and Newburgh. The gang, like unfortunately a lot of gang-like operations, certain killings and arrests dismantled the group, and it was basically less known throughout the course of the 1930s. But the golf course, which was built in the 1920s, operated until the 1980s when it was cleared for development. The Mission Health Medical Building, which is about 4 or 5 stories high, is right there, and then homes around there as well. That's how the Northville Golf Course and Club was redeveloped. Another transition that took place in the 1920s was the initial platting in 1925 for 2 of Livonia's most famous neighborhoods, Rosedale Garden off of Plymouth and Coventry Garden off of 5 Mile. There I have a picture of one of the early Rosedale Garden homes, which was initially built in the 1920s. The depression of the 1930s slowed construction, and then that neighborhood really got going with construction built up in the 1940s. One other thing I wanted to point out also from this area, this gentleman right here, Eddie Seacott. Eddie Seacott was a member of the Chicago Black Sox. In the 1919 World Series, as many of you know, that was the scandalous World Series where gangsters threw the result of the series. Eddie Seacott was a pitcher on that team. He was 35 years old and kind of had a renaissance that year. He had 29 wins in that season. He was promised a $10,000 bonus if he had won 30 games that year. He was benched the last couple games of the year, so he could not get his 30th win. So when the gangsters wanted to influence the heavily favored White Sox in the series against the Cincinnati Reds that year, Eddie Seacott was among several players that took bribes from the gangsters. He was paid $10,000. So just to show how that played out, in the first pitch of that series, Eddie Seacott was the starting pitcher. He plunked the first hitter of the game as a signal to the gangsters that he took the bribe. As it turned out, Eddie Seacott, the Reds went on to win that series, and the gamblers made a lot of money. There was an investigation, first criminally, of which Eddie Seacott, Shoeless Joe Jackson, and 6 other players were found not guilty of any criminal wrongdoing, but the commissioner of baseball banned them from playing anymore. So that ended Eddie Seacott's playing career. So legend has it he took his $10,000 and came to Livonia, invested in a strawberry farm at the 7 Mile Merriman area. So Eddie Seacott lived to 84 years old, and he died in 1969, and he's buried in Parkview Cemetery here in Livonia. So kind of an interesting story from that era.
What's plug mean?
He hit the batter deliberately.
Oh.
Sorry, that was a baseball geek term, sorry. So he intentionally hit the batter with a pitch. So there was to let the gangsters know he was all in for that. So all right. Next, back to Wilson Barn. Again, as I mentioned, it was built in 1888. It burned down in 1918, and it was rebuilt to produce a lot of milk, a lot of cows, and part of the farming activities. And it led to a growing local business. By the 1930s, Ira Wilson was considered one of Michigan's most successful businessmen and developed the Ira Wilson Sons Dairy Company, which distributed milk through deliveries and stores across Metro Detroit. Ira Wilson must not have been too busy, though, because he was elected to do 2 terms as sheriff of Wayne County. The Wilson family eventually sold the business in 1981 to Melody Farms. Melody Farms was owned by legendary Chaldean businessman Michael George. Along with his brother Sharkey, the duo grew the family business started by their father Tom in 1950. Michael George is considered the godfather of the local Chaldean community with his philanthropy and his personal support to get many entrepreneurial and Chaldean-owned businesses started in Metro Detroit over many decades. What I'm told by a lot of people that are really intimately knowledge of the Chaldean community, he may have co-signed on as many as 1,000 loans to get business started for Chaldean folks here in Southeast Michigan. He's very much a revered figure in that community. Melody Farms continued to operate a plant in Livonia when the George family sold their operation to Dean's Foods in 2003. Facing financial troubles, Dean Foods closed the Livonia plant and other operations in 2018 and filed for bankruptcy in 2020. But it was eventually acquired by Country Fresh, based in Grand Rapids. So when you look at the Country Fresh logo in the grocery store, you can trace it all the way back to Wilson Barn, through Ira Wilson, through Melody Farms, through Dean's Foods, and then to Country Fresh. So kind of a neat little Livonia lineage there to kind of a known brand today. And then you cannot talk about the influence on Livonia history and not talk about the Felician Sisters. They have had a monumental influence in Livonia. The Catholic Sisters of the order based in Poland arrived in Detroit in 1879 to serve in the Archdiocese of Detroit and support Polish immigrants that moved here. They came to Livonia in 1926 and purchased 320 acres of land between Schoolcraft and 5 Mile, Newburgh, and Levan. And there's just a beautiful picture of the campus there, especially in the fall with the changing colors. In the mid-1930s, they constructed the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary Convent, known today as the Mother House, with additional space for the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary College, known today as Madonna University. The look of the buildings in the middle of the Felician Sister campus was rooted in Northern Italian architectural style. Construction started in the 1930s. The Mother House got going, but the chapel, which is really a majestic building for those who've had a chance to see that, was not completed in 1961. But there was more work to be done. In 1950, they constructed more buildings for the college at its current location at the corner of Levan and Schoolcraft. Madonna College was renamed Madonna University in 1991. Also in 1950, the Felicians built Ladywood High School, an all-Catholic girls' high school. With declining enrollment, however, Ladywood was closed in 2018, and the building has since been repurposed primarily as an athletic facility for Madonna University. In 1959, the Felicians opened St. Mary Mercy Hospital. In 1976, they opened the Montessori Center of Our Lady as a preschool and daycare center. And in 1985, they opened Angela Hospice, which is regarded as one of the area's leading places to provide compassionate end-of-life care. It is amazing at what the Felician Sisters have produced with social services and educational offerings over the past century. They have clearly left their mark on our community, but as the order loses members, they are looking to reinvent uses of their Livonia property. One proposed use includes the possibility of redeveloping some of the unused space in the Mother House for general public senior housing. Newburgh Dam was built in the 1930s by the Ford Motor Company to produce drill bits for their automobile manufacturing. And then when the war got going in the early 1940s, it transitioned into making military airplane parts for World War II. By the late 1940s, the manufacturing work ceased at the property on Newburgh and Hines Drive. It was then deeded to Wayne County. Today, it is primarily used to house the horses for the Wayne County Sheriff's Mounted Unit. Other businesses I want to bring up that opened in this era. The Winter Garden Tavern opened in 1933 across the street from an old courthouse. Legend has it many judges and lawyers brokered a deal or two over a beverage at the Winter Garden back in the day because the courthouse is right across the street. Slazer Heating and Cooling on 5 Mile Road opened in 1935. Riverside Arena, the roller skating rink on Plymouth Road near Levan, opened in 1940. And then Joe's Produce originated as Myrana Orchards in 1945. It was a farm started by the family, and then it became a fruit stand, which evolved into the initial version of the store in the 1960s. It's been expanded several times into the beautiful store it is today. And then the adjacent strip center the Myrana family owns today. Third generation Myranas own it with Joe nowadays, but there's a bakery and meat and other businesses in that neighboring strip. So again, a little farm turned into quite a business here in Livonia with Joe's Produce. All right, now the next era between 1948 and 1955 was a monumental time in Livonia, where Livonia transitioned from a sleepy rural township into a major Metro Detroit suburb. And it all started in 1948 when two major developments happened. One, they allowed private development of a horse race track. This enabled and started the ground to move to build the Detroit Race Course, which opened in 1950. Also in 1948, we had a major manufacturing facility open here. The General Motors Hydromatic Transmission Plant opened in 1948. They were the first of many manufacturers that started buying property along the rail tracks of Livonia. And that really launched Livonia into developing homes and businesses and bringing a whole lot of activity to the area. And it really got going during this time frame of 48 to 55. Going back to the Detroit Race Course, it was built on the corner of Middlebelt and Schoolcraft in 1950. My 21-year-old had no idea this race course existed, no idea whatsoever. She goes, where? The Meyer, you point this out. So it's amazing generation how these things get forgotten. But the race course was opened in 1950. It cost $5 million to build it. In today's dollars, that's $65 million. And it's 1 1/8 mile long. The racetrack had room for up to 1,200 horses and a seating capacity of over 20,000. It would be an attraction for horse racing enthusiasts for 5 decades. Another thing about the GM transmission plant, it was 1.5 million square feet, and it employed more than 4,000 people. It was located on Plymouth Road between Inkster and Middlebelt. A little bit more about that in a little bit. Also of note in 1948, the Raperty Turkey Farm opened, ironically. Obviously completely unrelated, but they're still around and kicking today. 2,000 turkeys. Where did that come from? But anyway, as you can see, they produce about 2,000 fresh turkeys a year at Thanksgiving, and it's been around since 1948. Also by 1950, civic leaders quickly responded with initiatives for the community to take advantage of the growing tax revenue generated by the horse track and major manufacturing developments. For example, the DRC enabled the city to generate $285,000 to renovate the then Township Hall into a more modern look in Livonia City Hall. Thank you, Kathy Bilger, for giving me the information on this. But this was located on the north side of 5 Mile Road, and based on how I read where the address was, right next to where the Livonia Civic Center office building is, where our chamber office is located at, basically right at Shady Site in 5 Mile. That's where the original Livonia City Hall was located at. And while work progressed on transitioning Livonia from a township into a city, which was completed in May of 1950, local business leaders also gathered to advance Livonia. The Livonia Chamber of Commerce actually held its first board meeting on February 12, 1950. Yes, our chamber existed before Livonia officially became a city. Our first board meeting included board members that are pretty notable figures in Livonia lore, such as Eddie Edgar, Harry Wolf, and William Brashear. They're all original members of the Livonia Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. The initial goals of the chamber was focused on bringing a post office to Livonia, and that is some of the rebel rousers there on the side there with saying we deserve a post office. And then also they wanted a hospital. So their work and other city leaders got a post office announced by 1954, and then as I mentioned earlier, the hospital opened in 1959. The first chamber office was actually located in Eddie Edgar's house in the 6 Mile Merriman area. Before the chamber rented various offices along 5 Mile Road in the 1950s and 1960s. The chamber broke ground on its own building on Farmington Road in 1967. The chamber sold that building in 2003, where it became a State Farm insurance office. And we were located in the city office on the south side of 5 Mile. Now we're currently in the Civic Center office across the street on the north side of 5 Mile. But throughout the chamber's 75-year history, just about all of it, we've been located right at the 5 Mile Farmington area. Some other things that we saw in the 1950s, with more notable businesses coming to town. Ford Motor Company opened the National Parts Distribution Center on the corner of Middlebelt and Plymouth in 1951. That was a grand opening picture that we found. And then the Livonia Transmission Plant opened in 1952. Together, they brought thousands of jobs to Livonia, and they still continue to employ thousands of people in Livonia to this day. For most of the time these operations have existed, Ford Motor Company has been Livonia's leading employer and taxpayer for just about the entire history of the city. These developments with all manufacturing brought other notable businesses to the area. The Plymouth Road turned into a significant automotive corridor as Bill Brown Ford arrived in 1954, and Tennyson Chevrolet opened in 1955. It's now known as Feldman Chevrolet. And they together attracted other automotive businesses nearby with auto repair shops, car washes, such like that. The other dealerships, the Jeep and the foreign automotives down on Plymouth Road, they all came in the 1970s. Now, I did mention the Livonia, the GM transmission plant. Believe it or not, Livonia did endure one of the nation's worst industrial accidents in 1953, as the GM transmission plant, which at the time employed 4,200 people, was completely destroyed by an accidental fire, raising all 1.5 million square feet. 6 people died in the tragedy, including a Livonia firefighter. I saw conflicting numbers with this, so I'm going to go with what I saw most consistently. There were a total of 15 people injured, and many people consider that to be the disaster that shook the automotive industry. The losses were reported to be ranging between $55 and $80 million. In today's dollars, that's between $600 million and $1 billion of damage that tragedy occurred. General Motors wasted no time repurposing the site. They constructed the Fisher Body Plant in 1954, and the company operated there for about 5 decades. Today, the property is known as the Plymouth Road Technical Center, and it houses several manufacturing companies, including Roush, NYX, as well as the headquarters for Virginia Tile. And then another thing near and dear to my heart was the Livonia Observer newspaper. When I moved in 1986 from Detroit to Livonia, the first job I had was delivering the Livonia Observer newspaper. And then later on, I would go on, I got a scholarship from there, and then I got the chance to work there for several years. And it breaks my heart as a guy that loves community journalism that we no longer have, Jim, your passion about not having the newspaper anymore. I feel it too, that we don't have this, this publication anymore. But as many of you know, the Livonia Observer was a revered publication, very much a part of the community spirit here for a long time. It was established in 1955. This was a beloved publication that was significant in Livonia's history, with a readership that reached as much as 14,000 subscribers in its prime years. The newspaper was purchased by Phil Power in 1973, and he eventually developed the Observer and Eccentric newspaper chain, a group of community newspapers serving many Detroit suburbs. The chain's headquarters and printing press was in Livonia on the corner of Levan and Schoolcraft for more than 40 years. Mr. Power sold the newspapers to Gannett in 2003, and the Livonia building was eventually sold to a parts manufacturer named Delta Gear in 2009. The publication printed its last traditional publication, this edition right here, in December 2002, but it continues to provide some local reporting in an online, on an online platform. Next, we're going to move into the late 50s, 60s, and 70s. As Ford and General Motors grew their presence in Livonia, the young city took a strategic look with plans to attract good industrial base while building quality neighborhoods. This led to the formation of the Livonia Industrial Development Commission in 1958. And as many of you, one of the legendary things about Livonia's development is the industrial corridor. There it is along the I-96 freeway in this picture. And what the Industrial Development Commission used was Schoolcraft Road, Plymouth Road, and the rail tracks around it to be a premier industrial corridor for automotive manufacturing, parts makers, tool and die, and other industrial uses. This built up the city's tax base and helped build momentum to build freeways in Livonia. The smart planning built barriers between these industrial operations and residential neighborhoods, and that was one of the beauties of it. You had the Plymouth Road, I-96, all the industrial, and then all the neighborhoods were outside of that. And that was actually, Livonia won all kinds of awards for how they artfully put that together. One of the biggest operations to be built during this time was the General Motors powertrain facility that opened on Middle Belt at the railroad tracks in 1971. That operated for about 40 years, and it closed about a decade ago when it was redeveloped for several industrial uses. We also started to see development of other significant new businesses that came to our community. As more homes and businesses came to Livonia, a rural airport at Middle Belt and Plymouth wasn't practical anymore. So the space ended up becoming Wonderland Mall, which opened in 1958. It was anchored by Montgomery Wards, Federals, Winklemans, and Cunninghams. It was initially opened as an open-air mall and then enclosed in the 1980s. It's when Dawn and I, when we were going to Franklin High School, that was our hangout in the 1980s. We walked around Wonderland Mall. So, and then a couple years later, Livonia Mall in 1964 attached to an already built Sears store, and it also had Crowley's as an anchor. Two of our major institutional operations opened during this era. As I mentioned earlier, St. Mary Mercy Hospital opened in 1959, and it was renamed Trinity Health Livonia a couple years ago. And in 1964, Schoolcraft College opened on Haggerty Road, providing post-secondary schooling to serve high school graduates from our neighboring school districts. We had two very legendary movie theaters open up in the early 1960s of Livonia. The Terrace Theater opened on Plymouth, west of Middle Belt, to give Livonia a nearly 1,200-seat movie theater and a screen of about 1,600 square feet. This theater was closed in 1999 and now serves as a body repair shop for Bill Brown Ford. A year later, not to be outdone, the Maikai Theater was built on Plymouth Road in Farmington with nearly 1,400 seats and 27 more square feet than what the Terrace had for a screen. The Maikai Theater was closed in 1987 and was briefly used as a live performance venue, first by OmniStar, then the George Burns Theater. Now, one of the final performances at the George Burns Theater involved a theatrical performance where actress Marlo Thomas, the wife of Phil Donahue, took off her clothes, much to the disdain of city officials. Legend has it this was among the last things to be held at that performing arts theater, and it played a major role in the theater's demise, and it was closed for good in 1993. It was redeveloped into condominiums and a new strip center in 2003. Also during this period, we had a number of family businesses that opened that are kind of like the Mount Rushmore of influential family businesses in Livonia. Bates opened in 1958, Daly's opened in 1959, the Handy Dip opened in 1963, Aubrey's came from Detroit to Livonia in 1967, and Primo's opened in 1968. One other thing about Bates worth noting, Bates, legend has it, is the reason we don't have a traditional downtown. In the late 60s, early 70s, when Ed McNamara was a councilman and then became mayor, him and other surrogates put a lot of pressure on Bates to sell that site so they could turn 5 Mile and Farmington into a traditional downtown area. The problem with Bates is that that little thing was making so much money. At the time, around 1970, to have a business that size, to make about $10,000 a year in profit was considered pretty good. Bates was making between $50 and $60 grand a year at the time. In today's dollars, that is well north of $400,000. So as you can tell, Bates, like, I'm not moving. We're making money in this little spot right here. People love our hamburgers, so we're going to keep doing it. And they are very much a legendary Livonia business and still mark our downtown area there at 5 and Farmington. All right, another interesting story that led to the placement of I-96 and I-275 happened during this era. That is the old Schoolcraft Road, and at the top is the Detroit Racecourse. And this would become what would eventually become I-96. I-96 was initially supposed to be a direct route between Detroit and Grand Rapids. So the freeway was supposed to initially angle through Livonia between Detroit and Grand Rapids. And then I-275 initially was supposed to be the western border of Livonia between Livonia and Northville and Plymouth. Harvey Mulkey, the mayor at the time, was more reserved in how Livonia was developed, but was at odds with the Livonia City Council. He was fine with the original plan. Legend has it, young city councilman by the name of Ed McNamara facilitated an overnight meeting with his council colleagues, state highway officials, and developers, without the mayor and without today's open meetings laws, to develop a plan where I-96 would stay along Schoolcraft Road, right along that route right there, next to the Livonia Industrial Corridor. And then I-275 would angle into Livonia between 5 Mile and 8 Mile, giving Livonia prime commercial space on either side of the freeway, giving Livonia more tax base opportunities. A couple years later, Ed McNamara would be elected mayor, defeating Harvey Mulkey. The layout of these freeways were constructed in the 1970s, sparked a business development boom in Livonia with more industrial operations along I-96, and then a boom of office and retail emerging in the northwestern part of the city. Next, we're going to move into the 1980s and 90s. We saw several office buildings rise into the city in the 1980s along the I-275 freeway, just as envisioned by those people in that overnight meeting led by Ed McNamara. A piece of the Schoolcraft College property was redeveloped into 7 Mile Crossings, this building right here, which attracted several national level tenants. Today we see DHL and Workforce Software anchored in those complexes. Victor Parkway along I-275 north of 7 Mile attracted major offices for Velasquez, 3M, and Quicken Loans at the time. And that's what you see along I-275 right there. Later in the 1980s, we saw Embassy Suites Hotel, which at the time was a significant get for our community. And it still has been renovated a few times since, continues to be a popular hotel in our town. Also, Comerica Bank built a major operations center, which served as a check processing facility on the corner of 6 Mile and Haggerty. The facility became one of the city's largest employers, with over 1,000 people working in that office in its prime years. As traffic grew, so did retail interest along Haggerty Road. In 1988, Laurel Manor Banquet and Conference Center opened on Schoolcraft west of Newburgh. And in 1989, Laurel Park Place Mall opened with Jacobson's as its anchor store. Today it is anchored by Von Mauer. And next to the mall, you have several additional office complexes that opened up around there, which are still very much a source of a lot of our business addresses today. And a movie theater also opened in there. By the end of the 20th century, about 97% of the city was developed. Now we're going to move into the 21st century and beyond. As Livonia celebrated its golden anniversary at the turn of the century, the city saw several major redevelopment projects that reshaped the city. The Detroit Racecourse closed, had its last race in 1998. There was brief speculation that this could be the site of a new stadium for the Detroit Tigers before Comerica Park was built. The DRC was redeveloped into Millennium Park with a variety of shopping and dining locations anchored by Costco, Home Depot, and Meijer. Also, there was an industrial warehouses built along this as part of the project. This would spark the construction of several new stores, restaurants, and hotels for several years along the Middle Belt corridor. Wonderland Mall was redeveloped and returned to its open layout in 2005, anchored by Walmart and Target. also featuring several outlot buildings for restaurants and stores. It was renamed Wonderland Village. A couple years later, Livonia Mall was redeveloped to demolish the old enclosed mall attached to Sears and constructed a new shopping center anchored by Walmart and Kohl's and several outlot buildings for restaurants and stores. The property was renamed Livonia Marketplace, and it also sparked several other redevelopments at neighboring commercial properties in the 7 Mile Millbelt area. Now, the Sears store, which closed in 2020, continues to be a multiple-decade dilemma for the city. Just to let you know, developers in the city have been trying to work with Sears to redevelop that corner for probably 20 years now. And the company was just non-committal. They wouldn't say yes, they wouldn't say no. They would take meetings and really do nothing with it, which is very frustrating. When people developed Livonia Mall, which is now Livonia Marketplace, they wanted to wipe out everything and redo something on the entire corner. They were stuck with having to cut off right at Sears and just develop what they ended up developing for Livonia Marketplace. A funny story I'll share from 2008. I'm in my second full year on the job. And at the time, the economy was slow. This is really during the Great Recession. And people are saying, what's going on with Livonia Mall? What's going on with Sears? What's going on? Believe me, there was interest in doing something right there, but the Sears thing was the challenge with it. And at the time, in the Chamber newsletter, I wrote that there is interest in redeveloping the corner, just Sears is being non-committal with what they want to do. This was actually picked up by Sears Corporate in Chicago, and I got a phone call from the PR company saying, you need to be a little bit more positive. All I said is that they weren't making a decision and all that stuff. About a year later, Jack Kirksey's mayor, and he's meeting with the developers, and we got a meeting, and I was meeting with this group. There was a meeting set up with the Sears CEO and in Chicago. So the developers and the mayor were going to go, and I initially was going to go. The day before the meeting, the mayor got a phone call saying, do not bring Dan West with you. He will not be allowed in the building. I kid you not, true story. So that's the story of Dan West versus Sears, Roebuck and Company. Another parcel of Schoolcraft College that was developed into College Park, which brought several restaurant stores and more office buildings. That's right here. And also there were several office tenants that were also built on the back part closer to the freeway, between Millbelt and the freeway. Among the office tenants today is Masco Corporation, a worldwide home construction company in operation for a century, and it is headquartered at College Park. Schoolcraft College also added new sports facilities in recent years to serve its students and growing interest in youth sports, with more soccer fields, a sports dome, a training center with volleyball courts for tournaments throughout the year. My daughter was just playing it there yesterday. Now, there are plans in the works for several major developments going forward. And one starts with the Comerica Bank operations site. Some of you may have saw. There's a drawing for what they want to do. They're going to get rid of the Comerica Bank processing. They're going to keep the parking garage, but there's just a significant plan to bring apartments, hotel, Whole Foods store, outlot buildings for restaurants, and a workout facility to that corner, to design to be really a lifestyle center, if you will, right there. So that's in the works. No construction plans yet, but plans have been submitted to the city, and that's on its way. The old shopping center at 7 Mile in Farmington, which was anchored by a Kmart store that closed in 2017, is about to be redeveloped into a Meijer Fresh grocery store and 102 townhomes. The mayor is advancing the Livonia Vision 21 plan at the City Civic Center campus, with a plan that started with the expansion of the Kirksey Recreation Center to make way for a new senior wellness center. There's the grand opening picture from last summer. Mayor Brosnan announced a plan to build a new city hall, and she hopes to break ground on that possibly later this year. And also, she hopes to find funding to build a new police department, modernize existing fire station, and eventually clear out 27 acres of the aging facilities on the Civic Center campus to make way for a new city center area with shopping, offices, residential, and recreational uses. Now, looking forward, I continue to see quality redevelopment opportunities coming now and into the future for Livonia. And our location, which has always been a great spot, continues to be the spot today. Developers tell me that the sweet spot of business development for the foreseeable future will be Livonia and the other communities around the I-696 and 275 interchange. This is viewed today as a strategic central area for all of Metro Detroit, as a lot of people traverse this intersection between home, work, and entertainment venues. This is proof that we continue to be a great location with a diverse collection of some 4,000 businesses in our city. We survived past lean times because we have a blend of businesses, which means that we're not as attached to the ups and downs of the automotive industry. Also, as we benefited from 2 freeways and a great central location within 30 minutes of downtown Detroit, Ann Arbor, and Metro Airport. Another thing I learned in recent years about the people who are involved in key decision making is that when they developed the city, regardless of background or politics, they deeply cared about this place. They wanted to succeed. They wanted Livonia to be special. They were passionate debates. I've heard some really passionate debates, some beers after meetings included some really passionate debates. But whether you won or lost the debate, the decision makers would generally return to what was in the best interest of the city. And as you look at all of Livonia, I think we are seeing the lasting fruits of their passion and their vision. And also, our residential property values endured ups and downs with urban sprawl. What is really interesting today is that we see a lot of new housing subdivisions that have popped up in Livonia the last few years, and as much as 70% of them are being purchased by people that currently live in Livonia or formerly lived in Livonia. We have a lot of people that moved a little west of here and came back and bought homes in Livonia, which to me really is a testament to the city's attributes and the loyalty and the connection people have to this place. Also, as I see opportunities for Livonia to build on its recreational offerings, as we see more bike trails and connections with our many parks, it's great for residents and visitors, as these trails can be easily connected to Hines Park, the I-275 bike trails, and provide great rides through many of our neighboring communities. We are seeing economic development in other parts of our state around bike trails and recreation, so I believe there's a lot of opportunities for that here in our community. I thank all of you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer a few. Yes.